All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome November meeting for the BAC. Chuck Rush, and we will go ahead and I'll just kind of introduce the agenda for tonight, and then we'll get right to business. So, you know, of note, beyond Josh, we do have a couple members of the public that will be joining us tonight for the public comment period. And then Monique will give us a quick update, as always, about where the school board is and kind of where things are. Those of you who are liaisons to other committees, welcome your thoughts and perspectives on the meetings that you guys have had and what you see. And then we've got Raj from the Information Services portion of the school system that's going to talk to us about some of the IT efficiencies that was just briefed at the last school board meeting. I know that efficiencies over the last few years as we've done this have been things that we have tried to talk about and address. And I know for some of you, when we did our poll, that was an area of interest, not just IT. We tried to get the transportation folks this meeting, but that was not possible to line up. So we'll defer that for another time. But after we kind of talk the IT piece with efficiencies, what I'd like to have as a group discussion is we try to think about moving into budget review when we get it at the end of February. How should we think about IT efficiency? Not that we're going to come up with a firm framework tonight, but I'd like a good discussion about as a committee how we do that, and what types of things would it make sense for us to take a look at as we, for those who haven't gone through one of these, we'll, if we get to a point where in the deficit or just in the review in general, efficiencies are proposed, how should we look at those? How should we assess them? And, for some of you who are in the management consultant space and who do this professionally for a living, welcome your thoughts about, some frameworks. Maybe we can look at that as a back going into March when we have to do the work we do. And then Eric will talk a little bit more on the policy review stuff. I know we're getting short final for some stuff that we need to take a look at that are coming due. And then I'll talk about the meeting cadence, December, January, February, about some of the things that we're going to try to tee up based on the feedback that everyone sent in, which I'm appreciative about. All right, so with that, you've all had a chance, I think, to review the October minutes. Are there anything in the October minutes that were not addressed? Any comments before we move to vote? Okay, seeing no comment, do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Okay, okay, it's moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand, aye. Using the reaction. All right, Juan, you out there? Juan Gordon. All right, regardless, we'll count it as an abstention. Motion carries. Okay. Okay, October minutes are approved. We'll go ahead and get those posted for the BAC website. Okay, moving on to public comments.
Do you want to let the new people go first and I can go last of the three? That's fine.
Sure, if you're willing to cede the floor for once, given that you usually are only one. For those other members of the public that are joining us, any public comment from you before we turn it over to Josh? Okay, seeing none, Josh, go ahead.
So good evening and happy November BAC. I'm going to share my screen very briefly, and then I will put a link to what I'm showing in the chat. Those of you who've been around for a while know that this is my customary thing to share with you all, which is the my annual comparison of salaries in the Washington region of teachers with a master's degree. The question sometimes is why teachers with a master's degree and not other one. Is because primarily this is the vast majority of the staff or of the teachers, and of the teachers are the largest number of employees, and of them master's degree tends to be the most. So I try in my presentations to be as honest as I can in what I do. Some little bit of good news this year, because DC's salary scale hasn't moved because it was really quite advanced. We did come out that on 2 steps on the scale, and I compared the districts that I've chosen were not gerrymandered to advantage me. I chose these back in 2014, and so in an effort to be fair, I have kept the same ones for 8 years. And so we are now at the top for the years 14 and 15 in the scale, but as you can see, as the starting salaries across the region and then in the ending salaries across the region, red represents districts that pay more than us. Yellow represents districts that we do pay more than, but only within $1,000. And the reason that I always believe that matters is if you're looking at a place like, say, Loudoun County, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 steps that they're ahead. And then on the 10th one, if there's a teacher out in Centerville, which way would they want to drive to work? So that's why I put those numbers in there. So I will put in the chat where we're at, because one of the things that the Arlington Education Association has been advocating for is it's 3-pronged, which is that we continue to observe the market, we honor the step, and we keep up with the COLA. And as we know, with everything, the COLA is going to be quite large this year. We've advocated for the COLA to tie to the Social Security increase, which is 5.9%. So one piece I'll be appreciative of is there's going to be some information and action coming to the school board on the 16th regarding a $1,000 bonus to staff, which is a little bit of sharing in the windfall of closeout overages. And of course, when you have one-time money, you want to only spend it on one-time expenses. And so that is why a bonus is something that we had to look at there. So we appreciate it. Unfortunately, the number one question I get from people is, what's the catch? And as far as I understand right now, there is no catch. So with that, I thank you all. If anyone wants a longer conversation about my chart, Chuck, if they message you, please send their emails my way. I am more than happy to have a conversation about this part of the salary scale or any part of the pay plan for APS, because it's 50-some pages long, over Zoom, over coffee, whatever people are comfortable with. So with that also, yeah, I'll leave it right there. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Josh. Looks like Eric has a question.
Yeah, Josh, quick question. The DC numbers, does that include the DC charter schools, or is that just the DC public non-charter schools?
That is just DCPS, and it does not include, because I try to be as fair as possible, there is something called Impact Plus where you were able to do certain things and achieve bonus money, and I deliberately leave those things out. I try to make it as what would just a teacher on their piece of paper see for salary.
Okay, yeah, because I understand it, about a quarter of the DC students can actually go to charter schools now, and their salaries are 20% lower than the PS numbers, is what I saw.
Sure, and I would probably say right now that during the great shuffle of staffing is that I would be interested to see what how everyone is recruiting right now, and that being 20% lower is probably not very advantageous in the region.
Okay, just curious. Good, thanks.
And Jennifer.
Yep, sorry. Just two quick questions. Josh, and thanks. I actually love seeing this. Thank you for putting this together every year. I just quickly, who would the proposal for the bonuses cover? Like what staff would be covered in that, and what's the kind of estimated cost of that? And I guess, and then one follow-up question to that too is if the what would be the, I'm sure it would be much more expensive, but what would be like the trade-off between sort of like say a one-time bonus versus trying to bulk up those early years of making that more cost competitive, salary competitive with other districts?
So first, thank you for the question. I appreciate all of that. Being the actual cost number, I will defer to Leslie on that, which I'm guessing they are going to be presenting in great detail. I'm waiting for the PowerPoint on that to drop. But as written, it was $1,000 to all full-time employees in Arlington Public Schools. Part-time would be $500. And they are in the process of working out details on the hourly. And again, I'll defer to Leslie. I'm sure she can probably give far more detail. I see her hand go up. Far more detail on that. The cost, because the money is coming out of one-time money, being able to use this money to bulk up the salaries really wasn't an option, as much as I would love it to have been an option. Also in the link, and then I'm going to defer to Leslie to give all the details, is you can see my historicals going back to, there's a tab going back to 2014-15, where you can see all the previous years, and just copy and paste it into your own Excels and play with it as you like.
Okay, Leslie.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, so what I was going to say is that it is $1,000 for full-time employees, those people who are 1.0 FTE, and then it's prorated down from that. So if you're a part-time person who works 0.75, you actually get $750. If you're a 0.5, you get $500. If you're a 0.25, you get $250. And then we also have some hourly employees who are not on a scale, but they report to work every day and they have set hours, and those employees are going to get $500.
Very nice, Leslie. That's wonderful to hear all of that extra detail. Thank you so much.
Just a question for you. If you could put your chart back up for a moment, please.
Absolutely. Give me just 1 second. I am on an older computer. I left my good one at work.
So based on how you laid the chart out, green is only if Arlington pays as a leader in the region. I guess I would be interested to see, from this analysis from you, a comparison against perhaps the average or median price or median at scale. They might tell a different story. Competitive could be, I guess, looked at a number of different ways. Being, obviously top in the region is one thing, but, I think maybe looking at different ways of what competitive might actually mean. And I guess maybe more for the school board would be, how do we define, in the compensation structure, what does competitive mean relative to our, peer counties that are around us? So maybe perhaps not a question, but just a comment that there may be a couple different ways to look at it, but I think the analysis is still relevant of, kind of how we sit against those around us who would, compete for the same labor pool.
Sure. I'll add one thing. I'll add to it is no employee is a median employee, and so every employee really cares based on where they sit. It's when you get to the higher level that you're more interested in medians. But to your point, the reason I provide the link to people is, but especially with BAC, I appreciate you all because you appreciate numbers. Is that through the link, it's a Google spreadsheet, and so you are more than welcome to copy and paste the numbers and do anything you want with them, and give me no credit for having put the numbers in one place.
No, it's quite all right. No, we do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Josh? Okay, seeing none. All right, we'll go ahead and turn this over to Monique for an update on the board. And I think this is
Thank
like
you
your
all.
last one, right? We got you next month and that's it, right?
That's it, Chuck, you're right. But I'm so happy to be here with everybody tonight. And just I want to thank you for giving me a few minutes. Actually, Josh stole my thunder. I was going to tell you guys about Dr. Duran's proposal to really try to honor our staff for all of their hard work. No worries, Josh. It's okay. We're partners in trying to get the info out. And wanted to share the news that Dr. Duran is going to be offering the bonus that that Josh and Leslie were able to already outline. We think that this is a good thing to hear right now. We are expecting a closeout that is maybe a little larger than we had anticipated, and we do care deeply about our staff, especially after what they've been through in the last year and a half. And so this is a good information that the board is going to be able to consider, and from my opinion. And as it was outlined, it's $1,000 and prorated for part-time staff as well. So that's one thing that we're going to hear. Also, Dr. Duran wants to move forward in terms of thanking our staff by actually closing for winter and spring break. So that's another thing that I think can be of value. And I think, Chuck, you were bringing out some aspects of, you know, how important and valued staff are. Compensation is one, the way that we treat staff is another. And so we're trying to start off, I think, or Dr. Duran is trying to start off in ways, I believe, to help show our staff that we value them. And this is one way to do that. As you all may recall, the school board priorities include looking at compensation in the future as well and trying to become leaders in that area so that Josh's chart will look a little more green, I think. And so school board colleagues have been sharing, yes, I love green too, Josh, thanks, have been sharing this idea with our leaders as well on the county side, so that they'll understand that as we continue to work together, one of the things we want to do is, again, to become more competitive when it comes to our staff. So that's something I just wanted to share with you. In addition to that, the bond did pass in this election, and I think I've gone over the bond before, but I'd like to share that some of the things that we're going to do with this bond include doing some upgrades to our kitchens, also working on our security vestibules, and also giving some more attention to the Heights. You guys might recall that when the Heights was originally built, the county needed some of the space there for a temporary fire station, and that impacted the way that we did one of our entrances, and had to do basically a very zigzag entrance way for folks who use wheelchairs. And that actually has become had become an issue for some of our students who would get drenched or get wet with snow. And so we're going to, with the money that was passed in the bond, reconfigure that entrance by utilizing some of the space that was originally taken up by that temporary fire station. And we're also going to add a little bit of parking so that there are places for some families to park on site if they have to pick up their child or not. And so those are three of the things that are going to be moving forward with that bond money. And then the other thing that is important for me to share with you is at the last school board meeting, the school board did adopt some school board direction for the superintendent on the upcoming CIP. And we went over that in draft form, but just to remind you, basically that's to continue some of that work with the vestibules and other items. And in addition to that, we're looking at working with the Career Center, and we've asked the staff to come forward with 2 different proposals. And those proposals would include base ed specs that would hold like 1,800 students or so at the Career Center site for Arlington Tech, Academic Academy, and in our CTE classes from our neighborhood schools, and also give us an alternate proposal that would hold about 1,350 students. I'm rounding there. And the hope is that we will have that information so the school board can make a decision about how to move forward. In addition to that, we're also going to be looking at some longer term plans for evaluating our existing facilities so we can do renovations to some of our current buildings and kind of get them back into a rotation to be upgraded as well. Those are some of the major things that are happening in that CIP direction that the school board passed. I think those are all the things. Oh, the other thing, I'm not sure that I had the opportunity to tell you last time, but we do have a partnership with Amazon that is related to that Career Center site because Amazon will be providing for us a new location for Arlington Community High School. I know one of the things that you all talked about in your last message to the board and your year-end report was to look for partnerships. I think this is one example of that coming to fruition. With that, Chuck, I think I'm done and I appreciate the time.
Okay. Jennifer.
Yeah, Monique, I was just curious, can you talk a little bit more about the closeout for this year? You said it was larger than normal. I think I've seen somewhere that might be as much as 62 million. I guess wonder, like, what is it? Yeah, what have we seen in past years, and what are like the major sources of what are the major reasons why there's such a large closeout this year beyond the sort of one-time funds? But I know we were looking at a severe deficit, so just curious.
You and the rest of us want to know. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have to wait until Dr. Duran and Leslie bring information to us so that we have a better analysis of why it is that we're so fortunate to have the closeout that we have. Thanks so much. And the one other thing, though, I would say is that oftentimes closeout, and Josh would love to probably be able to chime in at this point, comes from lapse and turnover as well. So when we have some of our staff who leave and it takes us time to be able to rehire for that position, we do find some savings there. And oftentimes we've used that savings in the past to pay for some of the compensation. So it's not unusual to have a closeout, and oftentimes much of that closeout would go for compensation for our staff. Leslie could give you a whole masterclass on this, and so I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. Any other questions for Monique? I'm sure there'll be many people interested in the size of closeout and how those funds may be deployed. I'm sure Leslie will have many suitors for that money.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any of our members that tie into some of the other group, other advisory boards, anything significant that you would like to bring to the table? One, I did see it. I just forwarded it out. I'm sorry I did not get that out earlier, but I just did forward your report to the rest of the team. But with that, any of our members who do work with the other committees like to highlight anything from their previous discussions? Josh.
Because Juan in the email said that maybe I could, as putting my different hat on as chair of ACTC, very excited that
so that kind of ties into scheduling next meeting. Like I said, I think.
Sorry, I'm getting
close to trying to make something happen next month. The county is working with ART to start providing large number of students the option to have free rides on the ART buses. And so this has been a long-term goal of ACTC is to move students off yellow buses. For instance, if you have students in Crystal City who go to HB Woodlawn, there is the 43 bus goes directly there. How wonderful would it be for them to go directly to the school? So they're starting as a pilot. The goal of ACTC is all students have access to all buses in the county, but this is a first step.
And then I'm assuming, Josh, based on that, while the savings may not be large, we should realize some savings if students are relying on those means of transportation. That'd be fair to say.
Yes. We're not going to see, and I see Monique's hand going up on this. She can add to it. So you're not going to see overnight millions of dollars and a wholesale sell off of buses. If we are able to flatline the number of buses we need in Arlington, that is the win, and that is the goal. If we might even be able to whittle down a few, but the goal is to flatline.
Okay, Monique, and then Juan.
Thank you, Chuck. I just wanted to say how excited I am about this. I know when I first came on the board, I was really enthusiastic about us doing a pilot on this. And before COVID, we did do a pilot, and we had students from Langston, the Career Center, I believe, and the Heights have the opportunity to be able to take public transportation. In addition to what Josh said, which is eventually we could potentially see some savings from this, but I think it's also one of these things where we're actually helping our children become 21st century citizens, having the ability to be able to learn how to take public transportation for now, for the future. And also, I think with the availability of more students taking non-yellow buses, that will give us the opportunity to potentially be able to serve our other students even better. So I'm really excited that the county has come up with this idea to make this accessible financially to everyone. And that also can mean important things like kids deciding, okay, I am going to stay after school to meet with the teacher and not have to wait for the late bus, and other opportunities and activities. The question will be how transportation may be able to use this and fit this in the future. I'm not sure that they will be able to do it immediately, but this is another important step, I think, that could be on a really fantastic journey.
And Juan, go ahead.
Okay. Josh and Monique covered the areas that I really thought that the committee really is working very hard to cover. I want to commend Josh for the work that the committee is actually doing, and I think they have some things that are really essential for the advancement of students in APS. And thanks, Josh. Just want to say that to you.
Thank you, Juan.
Okay. Any other committee liaisons? Okay. So in the previous school board meeting, there were a couple of, there were about, I think, 3 rundowns on efficiencies. One of them a bit focused on infrastructure, talking about some of the HVAC upgrades and whatnot. Some, a little bit on the transportation piece, but Rod has been kind enough to join us tonight to talk information services efficiencies, which, given, what we have all addressed and dealt with as parents, part-time IT consultants, and everything else during the last year. Really, one, thankful that he could join us tonight to talk about, the information services piece of the efficiencies discussion and, what we've learned, I guess, and then just kind of, what his thoughts are about moving ahead. I know for some of you, you've been pretty vocal about this area and how, leveraging technology and how that may help us create efficiencies in other areas of, APS. So with that, I will turn it over, and we welcome your presentation, and thanks again for joining us tonight.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. First, thank you for giving the opportunity for, sharing more information around this presentation. So I'm not going to get into repeating what exactly was presented the other day, but I think I will try to touch on the top points and the things that we've actually shared to see if anybody has questions. I'll be glad to try and answer them. And if I can't, I will definitely make an effort to actually follow up with Leslie and share more responses as a follow-up. So I think that'll be my plan for this evening. I think I've actually shared 3 kind of areas with the board in the recent presentation. Obviously, we wanted to talk about things we were doing with instruction, things we were doing for student support, but we were also very importantly trying and to bring back a discussion about business support, because it's an area that we actually, like you just talked about with respect to efficiencies and things in other departments and how they actually also need immediate action. So quickly, I think with the smart boards, we have actually been this year standardizing the model and replacing smart panels across each school. And we actually have a plan in motion, and then kind of shared those details with the school board. The current approach was actually about we're replacing about 125 panels in elementary schools, and other 25 panels in middle schools and 25 in high schools. And we're going through this rotation cycle so that we can actually maintain smart or the technology that is needed for instructional spaces. So while we actually are doing that, we definitely thought it would be worthwhile for the board to understand what the other options are in case they have an appetite to expedite the process. Because obviously when we did an audit on what type of issues are still outstanding, we did have some kind of old ones that needed repair, things that needed to be addressed. And instead of actually having to kind of wait for some of these, if there was an appetite for expedition of the process, obviously we gave them two options. One was kind of for one swing shift, replace everything. Obviously that was presented. We presented a cost associated with that and what that would look like. The other one was kind of maybe kind of spreading all of the district replacements over the next 3 years actually, and then kind of laid out another option as to what that cost would look like as well for the board. I think that is what was presented as part of the smart board updates. The other one, I think that was more important, was the lessons learned. I think what we have been doing over the pandemic, and I started off my presentation, I don't know if you actually had a chance to see that the last 2 years have been extremely challenging for information services with the kind of challenges and the kind of requests that we've been put forward. But I wanted to thank our department. Actually, everybody in the department has actually risen up and done more. And I can't be thankful of a better team that we have in Arlington to support the students through the process. So again, what we have, I think if you layer out multiple components of infrastructure that needs to be addressed, obviously I go from the bottom up. You need to actually have definitely wireless access points, then carrying the data from the access points is the backbone, and the backbone that's connecting it to Connect Arlington, which is the network infrastructure we have, and the internet capacity that we actually have behind it. So I kind of laid out some of the things that we have done in the past, thanks to the work we have been doing for years. Now we have a routine of replacing the wireless access points, 1/5 of them every year, so which is exactly their age and perfectly fitting out in a nice cycle. We've also worked on kind of fitting up all of the schools, and we still have a few, but we have 35 of them have been fitted with outdoor wireless access just to support families and the needs. We've improved the bandwidth behind the back end as well, from the 10 gig to 440 gig kind of internet capacity. We also did something we are using Connect Arlington, but the pipes, I'm just trying to break it down to be very simple. The plumbing system that connects our schools to Connect Arlington is also being kind of upgraded to just keep up with the continuous increase in the usage or the demands on the system. So we've actually been doing all that. One of the things I wanted to highlight was, thanks to the school board's effort, we've been very aggressive in supporting families with their connectivity needs. Any family that needs connectivity, that particularly was so important during the recent times, we've been able to support them. We actually have a combination of Comcast Internet Essentials sponsorship, that is one thing, and also in places where Comcast is not supported, we have been fitting the students up with Kajit MiFi so that they can actually take advantage of that one. that was the infrastructure update I presented. And then the last one, which was very important, I think, which is a big ticket item, is we've talked about ERP upgrade. I'm sure like all of you are pretty aware that we have been having this Oracle Financials as our backend for both HR and finance. And this system has been in place since 2005. And Oracle itself is discontinuing the version of the ERP version we have, and is actually forcing us to actually look at upgrading our tech stack so that we can fall back into compliance with support and maintain usage, or actually at the same time look at cloud infrastructure, which is where Oracle wants everybody to be, and which is again like every ERP system moving everybody towards as well for additional functionality. So there were those options that I presented to the board. One was to actually say, give them a very tight timeline of moving with core functionality into the cloud, and then also bringing in additional functionality as well into the cloud infrastructure. And we laid out a timeline, a potential timeline for this for 3 years, and we presented the cost associated with that. One of the things I also shared with the board was this is a very similar footprint as to what the county did. They brought in a consultant. They actually had kind of a review of the solutions in the market, the cost in the market, and saying what would be a better idea for them. And at the end of the day, I think what they have presented is exactly the same thing. So it is kind of in line with experts that the county have actually brought in as well. One thing that we actually also presented was to say, in case we want to defer the adoption of the cloud functionality, what are our costs? And we definitely have to upgrade our tech stack, and we presented a cost associated for that one as well. That was really the summary. I think I said, I hope you're not looking to repeat all of that, but those were the 3 areas. Instructionally, we've been focused on the technology in the classrooms with the main focus on the smart boards. The second one was the actual infrastructure of the network, and the third one was the business systems. And that was the presentation we went through. Leslie, do you want to add anything, or is there any particular questions? If not, then I can actually address any questions.
Nope, this is your show, Raj.
All right.
While folks are thinking of questions, I guess my first one would be is, obviously, with tech and how things evolve, there's a life cycle to replacing, things that become obsolete.
Yes.
And staying apace of what the market and innovation is bringing to be able to upgrade what we have. I guess my question is, do you see any sort of long-term kind of sustainable costs associated with that, or just just based on your experience, how should we think about things like life cycle replacement of the different pieces of infrastructure? Because I'm sure over time it is that cost has grown as we've become more outfitted with different technologies for instruction, infrastructure, business practices such as that.
Absolutely, it's a great question, actually, Mr. Ash. I think one of the things that imagine that there are 4 layers in the network. I'm just trying to simplify that. There's obviously the whole internet bandwidth, and then there's the backbone, the Connect Arlington infrastructure that we have. On top of that is the plumbing system that connects to that one. And then there's the system or the access points in the classroom. We have looked at all of them, and out of this, we've had very methodically addressed Connect Arlington. Then we have actually come back to wireless access points from the other side. We've fitted out with the plumbing. So all of them are on a nice replacement cycle, in a way that next round of innovation that comes up with better functionality would be naturally brought into the replacement cycle for majority of the components. There's just one component that we have not added into that replacement cycle, and that is the closet switches, and that is the last component that we need to factor in. And if we factor that in, then Arlington's backbone will be in a very nice, sustainable cycle of kind of sustainability as well as adopting to technology as the replacements come through. The switches, we wanted to actually see add them this year, but unfortunately, the life of the switches still exists. So we are going to go ahead and come forward with a replacement cycle for the last piece that needs to be added to this infrastructure maintenance starting next year, next budget cycle, not this budget cycle, but that one will cover the gamut of the infrastructure. Now, coming back to the business systems, I think we've kind of focused on moving the products to cloud-based so that, the infrastructure, we're maintaining minimal infrastructure and minimal overhead on our part, and we are only focused on the value add proposition related to those systems being used by our staff. So Canvas, which is a learning management system, is in that model. Student information system itself has been migrated to that. The business ERP system is also, it's not truly cloud, but it's actually maintained by the vendor in the infrastructure in their cloud. But we truly want to migrate into the cloud-based infrastructure. So that is the next piece with the proposal for ERP as well that we were bringing forward. So hopefully the intention of actually moving into the cloud was that to say you're not locking yourself with functionality today for long term by maintaining costs on the infrastructure, but you're constantly keeping up with additional functionality that's made available that can be brought back to the users immediately. And that's our focus. That's how our approach is. So thank you for that question.
Okay. Bridget.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. A lot of the I'm new to the committee, to the council, so forgive me for some of the questions. I just want to understand a little bit better, and I did not watch the presentation. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So you mentioned the 35 wireless access points across the county. Help me understand, are you saying that in addition to connections within the classroom, there are other points where students have access throughout the county?
Bridget, I think what I was saying was we have set up 35 schools with outdoor Wi-Fi access to help families and students just in case they need it. Particularly, we got this request from families during the pandemic because there were families that had enjoyed high quality internet services in their homes, but some families needed connectivity and they were looking for opportunities or places where they would be able to have connectivity so that the students could use them, or in case some families could use them. So we've collaborated with the county because it actually helps not just the students but also the families, and is also a digital equity initiative as part of the county as well. And we've kind of equipped our buildings, ensured that we've set up wireless access in a way that outside the school building, you have wireless connectivity provided, access being provided. Hope I've answered your question there.
And it's a two-part question. So in addition to those access points outside of the classroom, you've provided students who didn't have access otherwise with their own access.
Yes.
Is that what I understood? Okay.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, while we talk about equity, I think the most important thing, and I'm glad the board actually thought this way too, is to make sure that the student is not sitting on the street to actually get access to it. I think it would be preferred that the student is in the safety of their home and actually still getting the same opportunity that his classmate or her classmate is enjoying in a different home. So to do that, I think the connectivity within the home was also important, right? And that is where the Comcast Internet Essentials sponsorship and the MiFi support with Kajits have actually come in, and that is what we've been doing, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Eric?
Thank you, Raj. The level of detail is fantastic. I really appreciate it. I guess I had a question about kind of our financial metrics of how we evaluate how we're doing, and this might be a question for you or for Leslie. But do we track or look at how much we spend on IT and compare that to other districts locally, whether it be on a cost per student basis or as a percentage of overall operating budget? Do we kind of look at that and see how we do compared to our school district peers?
Leslie, you want to answer that question? We'll have bits and pieces of information.
Why is it that I always get a question right when I put a bite of food in my mouth? All right. Excuse me. No, we have not done an analysis of that kind on the budget and finance side. I don't know if Raj has done anything on his side to look at what others have done. Certainly something that we could look at doing in the future.
Yes, I think I can tell you from a big picture point of view, Mr. Sullivan, that the majority of the work, I think Arlington is actually lucky because of the Connect Arlington infrastructure we have. I can tell you definitely that from a network infrastructure and from an applications perspective, we actually are on the lower spectrum of spending compared to the other counties, particularly because of the lack of that infrastructure that has actually built in. That itself is a huge factor when you actually look at what can be compared with the other districts. That's definitely a point one. But we did actually at one point look at the overall staffing in terms of support that they actually have for infrastructure. And we definitely stand less as compared to Fairfax and actually Loudoun as well. For example, I think thanks to the board again, we've been able to get ourselves at least to the standards of the state with an expectation of technicians that we needed in the building. And we kind of were behind actually compared to all of that. And over the past few years, tried to catch up to what the minimum was that the state expected to actually have that number of personnel in the schools to support that. So obviously that is definitely one way to look at it as well. So that's the information I can share at this point of time, but you can definitely, like Leslie said, I'll be glad to do that because it definitely tells us a better story.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious if we had looked at that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I guess a question more for, Monique or Leslie, whomever might be more appropriate to answer this question. Certainly with the pandemic, some of the access that we had to give all students, since we were leveraging 100% virtual environment from an equity perspective, was important to ensure that every student had the same level of access. Do you see, I know that some of that cost was defrayed with a partnership, but do we expect that partnership to be able to continue into the future, or at some point is that that desire, not even a desire, I think a requirement, many of us would agree, to ensure that every student has internet access at home for educational purposes? Would that be something that that would be priced into the future, or do we expect that partnership to have some length of time where we don't have to worry about that from a budget perspective, ensure that every student can access the internet from home and be able to participate in the education needs that they have?
Chuck, thank you for that question. I believe that Raj actually addressed this during our presentation for the school board. So I actually wanted to catch that and pass it back to him so he can talk about the importance we believe of making sure that children now who have that connection at home remain connected. And he spoke eloquently about that. So I wanted to give him the opportunity to respond.
So yeah, thank you, Monique. I think one of the things I have to tell you, I think this is a very proud moment for Arlington, to be honest with you, because I think we are one of the few school districts in the whole country that can actually stand on the fact and be very confident to tell that we have addressed every connectivity need that has been identified and shared with the system that was brought forward has been addressed from an individual student point of view. So I want to share that. That's a great place to be. But that was the vision of the board. The board originally, when we started out asking for this support, it started as a joint effort with the county board, and the county board was able to help us out with the first round of sponsorships for the Comcast Internet Essentials program, but our board definitely agreed that it was a requirement. It's like electricity, it was like utilities, that every student should enjoy that function if they needed it. And therefore it was included in the baseline to allow us to cover for not just the year, but actually create a sustainable model in case we were to be able to do with that. So the short answer to your question, Mr. Rush, is yes. I think that has been the vision of the board, and that's how they set us up for it. And we are very glad we've been able to set that way, and we've been able to support students with that.
And I would just thank you so much, Raj, for just kind of setting the framework for that. And I also just wanted to share that one of the important things when it comes to equity is ensuring that our children can connect, because so much of the work, as you all know, those of you who are parents, how important it is for our students to be able to not just connect with virtual learning, but also to be able to connect to sometimes do the research they need for their homework, et cetera. One of the things that we note on a national level, even with the Congress right now, just recently passing the bipartisan infrastructure framework, the BIF, one of the aspects that infrastructure is lacking in this nation is broadband accessibility. And so to know that we were on the front lines of ensuring that our children can connect in a successful way, and ensuring that there's not a digital divide, that this does not contribute to the opportunity gap, I think is an important aspect for the superintendent, and I believe for this board. So we will continue to, I think, as Raj so eloquently outlined, try to remain ensure that our students can remain connected, even as the nation is trying to follow in those footsteps.
Yeah, Raj, it looks like you had your hand up for comments.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to actually add was the fact that the state is also taking a closer look at what the minimum requirements are to support and kind of particularly from technology point of view for students. And they're actually moving certain parts to say it's a minimum requirement is that every student would have access to a device or like to connectivity just in case, and also starting to give plan on giving recommendations. They're not creating them as mandates, but they're calling them as suggested recommendations. But eventually that ball is rolling very fast, and I'm glad we had that work started earlier in Arlington.
Okay. Before I ask one final question, I just want to give anyone else an opportunity. Any other questions or comments based on this discussion? Okay, so I guess, from your view, given that, here in a few months when the superintendent delivers his budget, obviously, I think we all share that the IT, we touch it, I think most of us in different ways because we're parents, and what we saw in the last year and how that was, while it wasn't an ideal environment, I can't imagine what last year would have been like without it. As we look at the work that we will do upon the delivery of the superintendent's proposed budget, what are some areas that you are thinking about, or areas that you would offer to us that we think about in terms of it as a committee with respect to information services in the budget, advice or ways that you would ask us to think about your area of responsibility?
Absolutely, I appreciate the question actually, Mr. Rush, because there was actually 2 school board meetings ago, I think 2 years ago, we presented a visual of the technology adoption and how fast it was actually being adopted, and the amount of usage was so steep. I apologize for the call, but it was so high. But the support related to staffing, or like to be able to keep up with supporting that level of demand is also something that we hope will be actually offered, and that is what we will come forward with as requests to sustain the usage, to sustain the dependency of this technology. I think that is the sustainability will be a key word that I hope the Budget Advisory Committee can actually keep looking at to understand and actually look at from that one. That would be number one. The other one would be to say, whenever you talk about efficiencies in other places and whenever you bring in a system, it is going to bring an extra load or extra kind of things that the IT office has to actually run with. It definitely brings a lot of value propositions, but also brings some additional work. Then what type of systems and what type of supports have been brought along with the adoption of those efficiencies to ensure that the system is not cracking in terms of maintaining that one or to support that in the long term would also be a good structure to think through, right? For example, if I'm bringing in 10 new systems to actually try and automate some things that 15 or like 15 people do, but it still requires a couple of people to monitor, manage, and maintain those kind of systems to sustain the usage. So those support systems also are some things that we are closely monitoring and will bring forward, but hopefully Budget Advisory Group can also take a look at it and then ensure that we are supported. That's all I ask of.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Raj. And any alibis before we move into a group discussion here? Okay, no, thank you very much for that, Raj. I know, I think we all, the insight I think each of us gained, not just what goes on in the classroom, because, we were all, part-time participants, I think, depending on grade level of our kids. But I do know that the amount of work that it took, and that, even though the first couple of days might have been a little bit bumpy, we certainly had, a greater level of success rolling out the, virtual instructional model compared to, some of those around us. Not that it was perfect, but I think over time, we all fell into how it worked. And, I know it, your staff, spent a lot of time getting it to where it was, and appreciate your guys' efforts, and just how that was not easy work, given how quickly we had to turn on an entire instructional model change to ensure that at least something was still enduring beyond the closure of schools with the pandemic. So I want to just again thank you and your staff for the work that was done to do that.
Thank you very much for the kind words, Mr. Raj. I'll take it back to my team. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, what I'd like to engage in, and I know that there are many here, all of us come from some different walks of life as far as what we do in our day jobs, but this notion of efficiencies has I think each year that I've been on the BAC, and I know for those who have a bit more tenure than I, we keep coming back to this spot each and every year about efficiencies. What does it save us in terms of time, manning, money, those kinds of things. From where we work or our previous lives, we've seen different attempts at efficiencies. I will be honest that I my former life was within the Department of Defense, and I've probably seen it tried every different way, and it usually ends up costing more than anything. So I can't say that my experience with efficiencies has always been one that resulted in what was promised. But I think it's important as a group that we, while we may not achieve consensus, I think, given the level of experience that each of us has with this, it would be a good discussion to have as a group about, the ways in which we try to look at efficiencies and how do we balance that with the other needs that we have within the budget. And just, I think to have a good discussion based on others' experience, how we as a group might look at that come March if we get posed with some opportunities for efficiencies. How might we evaluate those in a way that does have some rigor and discipline to it, and it's just not that intuitive field. So with that, I would like to open the floor for those with some perhaps some management consultant experience that have done this or have helped companies or organizations try to implement this. Some of the experiences you have in terms of how to look at it, how to evaluate it, and what experiences might be useful to us as a committee to think about it as we move forward in that, in that discussion.
So Chuck, I mean, I think the one thing we have to do is set up a way. So in order to be able to kind of evaluate those things and compare them and see where we might want to spend some time, we'd have to have a way to have a initial, I guess, benefit or cost or benefit estimation mechanism, right? So we'd have to be able to say what might the efficiency result in terms of savings. And then that if we had a 5 or 6 different opportunities, for example, you could then kind of rack and stack them and see where you get the biggest bang for the buck. I think if we wanted to look at doing something like that, we would have to be able to just simply quantify the potential impact first. Now that's sometimes easier to do. It's easier to say than do, right? Because a lot of our benefits might be softer benefits versus truly hard quantifiable financial benefits. But I think that would be one of the things we need to consider if we were going to look and look by area, whether it be technology, whether it be transportation, or any other cost area. There's always going to be opportunities to make things more efficient, but the payoff of doing some of those things may or not be there. To your point before, sometimes it actually ends up costing more. In which case you say it's really not an efficiency. We set that aside, move on to something else. So, one suggestion could be that, we look at it area by area. We try and evaluate the transportation, if there are transportation efficiencies, quantify those. If there are IT efficiencies, quantify those, and pull them all together and evaluate them that way to see where we could get the biggest bang of the buck. Now, I think, truth be told, I think a lot of our departments are doing that already, and I know Leslie does that already as part of what they do. But I think a framework like that might help us do something like that.
Then Melanie, you had your hand next.
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts. I mean, I think this was mentioned earlier around benchmarking, and I think it's incredibly valuable to see where we sit versus other districts. I mean, I just started to search online a little bit, and there are some statistics that are out there. I just found a U.S. public education spending statistics site, and it does cite an average amount that U.S. schools, K-12 schools spend on a per pupil annually. Now, I don't know if we could dig further and see, what are urban districts versus rural districts, what are more wired districts versus less wired districts look like, and to make sure that this is an up-to-date list says last updated August 2nd, 2021. So it's fairly up-to-date data. But I think that's a very valuable place to start, because if we're lagging, then, IT spend may not be the best place for us, for example. If we're ahead of the game, then that may be a place that we say we just have to pull back for a little while and say we just made a lot of investments over the pandemic, and maybe we slow down the replacement rate, for example, when we think about less expensive alternatives to some of the things that we are purchasing on a more regular basis. I think your question around management consulting is a good one, but a hard one for this group. I was a management consultant, and when you do that work, you go in with a team, you deeply understand the costs and the operations of an organization so that you can make very informed recommendations about where to find efficiencies or make cuts or not. And we as a team don't have that kind of access to the information, the data, the staff, or the time. And so it actually brings up a question around, if we really have to find a lot of money in our budget, are there credible groups where, even though it would cost some money, that the payoff would be, in terms of cost benefit, that the benefit to us as a school system to have a group of professionals go in and benchmark a lot of our costs and help us find some additional efficiencies maybe we're not seeing because we're too close to it, would help. Having been part of organizations on both sides, both being part of a management consulting team that helped organizations do this and being part of organizations that had teams come in, there is something about being a little bit too close to the data. You don't always see all the opportunities, or you don't always see if you are ahead of or behind other similar organizations. And so we may want to consider having a well-respected group that looks at school budgets come in and tell us where they see opportunities. But we would have to be ready to act on some of that in order for it just not to be another spend line item.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, we, even if you sit and look at this budget for a few years, I mean, I don't think any of us could count ourselves as an expert on, I mean, just how complex our budget actually is, and the different ways that we do spend money, compensation and otherwise. I guess one of the questions I had for the group that I'd like your thoughts on with respect to efficiencies is how it, we think about where the county has come the last 2 years, particularly in the discussion around equity, and are there targeted efficiencies that would better improve equity? And I guess thoughts for those around that idea. Are there ways where efficiencies can help drive more equitable outcomes? In the areas of our system where we do see some of those opportunity gaps, and would efficiencies be one way that we could take a look at that? I'm just curious if anyone had thoughts about that. Bridget?
Yeah, as we look at those efficiencies, though, I want to stress the importance of making sure that we're also looking at the quality of the service that's being provided as an outcome. Because when we look at equitable outcomes and we provide access that's equitable across the board, and I just want to use the MiFi example, for instance, we want to make sure that we're providing the same quality internet access, for instance, because if the bandwidth is much slower in one area and it's much higher in another, are we still providing the same quality of the service while at the same time trying to reduce some of those costs that's associated with those services? So that's something I want us to always keep in mind as well.
Yeah, the drive for efficiency, if we lose quality in the process, then really, there's a quantitative, but there's also I think
qualitative. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, yeah, no, that definitely, and I think that's the hard part, where we do have limited time when we get the budget. We have just 4 or 5 touch points to try to understand where the budget is in terms of priorities, and then where, depending on the fiscal situation at the time, which each year has been all over the map, that I've been on the BAC, where it's either cuts or efficiencies, or all of a sudden we get a windfall from federal and state money like we did last year that helped close the gap. But trying to balance those and maintain the quality that I think we do enjoy here in Arlington with respect to our school system. I guess, Leslie, given your experience, my question to you, you've watched this over a number of years. So as you think about, as our subject matter expert, but also, the wisdom of experience and what you have seen work, not work, and how the BAC plays a role in, taking a look at this idea of efficiency, just your thoughts about what you have seen work well, things that have perhaps not worked well, or just, some of those things that you could offer us, given, your time and tenure and what you've seen for us.
Wow. I think, not fully prepared for this question. I think that I would say that the efficiencies that I have seen that have worked well are ones that have had a process associated with them, so that you have a group or an idea, and then there's some research done, and then there's a consensus that's drawn, and then there's some engagement around that, and everybody's kind of brought in, and feedback is obtained, and the idea might be tweaked a little bit, and then eventually put into action. Ones that don't do so well, or ones that are just kind of thrown in or done at the last minute, or don't have the input that's needed to really ensure that it is the right efficiency to be taking, and that there's no unintended consequences, right?
Okay. Bridget, looked like you had your hand up, or is that still left over? Oh,
I took it down.
okay. Good, because Monique, I was going to ask you the same, since you've seen a few of these barbecues, but I guess your thoughts, but also advice as you have watched successive BACs and participated in many of these. Some thoughts or advice for us as a group to think about this.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Leslie, for your insight. I value it greatly. I just wanted to say that I think as we move forward, one of the things that I noted and that I want to remind you of in the school board kind of budget priorities is that even though we're looking for needs-based budget this year, one of the things that was called out is that in the future we want to work towards zero-based budgeting. This has been, over the last few years, while I've been on the board, a really tough time to do budgeting, right? I mean, we found out we were going to have a shortfall. We had to redo our budget under Cynthia Johnson. And then we had, lots of moving targets over the last 2 years because of COVID. As we try to get back kind of on a more systematic look at how we can kind of get back into regular budgeting, whatever this new normal is going to be, I am heartened by the fact that we had a presentation about efficiency recently in our school board meeting, of which Raj just gave you his portion. So there is a lot of interest in looking at efficiencies, and also interest in looking at zero-based budgeting. That kind of incorporates what Leslie was sharing, which is take a longer look, take a deeper dive, and see where we can go in terms of finding efficiencies. In the several years that I've been on the board, a lot of the efficiencies I have seen have come from central office and making fewer people do more things. And while I think that's been effective, financially, I think we need to look at our systems and making our systems more efficient. And that's what I think we're starting to hear. And so as the BAC continues to do its work, we're probably going to want to look at some of those systems. And I think the BAC should, I hope, will be appreciative of the aspect that we are looking at efficiencies on a system operational side. And the aspect of moving towards zero-based budgeting may help us get there. I would just say that if we take Leslie Peterson's advice and look at this in terms of how do we do this in a thoughtful way and have the council members ask thoughtful questions, we may get to some efficiencies that can stick, and taking advantage of things that the county is willing to work with us on. For instance, the bus issue that Josh and I spoke to earlier. Those are some of the ways that I think we can make a difference. And it may take a little bit of time and deep thinking, but I think we're finally at a point, I hope, where we can put more time to that as opposed to trying to chase COVID. Knock on wood.
Yeah. Yeah, to say that the last 2 years has not been challenging, I think, we've all, how that affected the first budget that came in on COVID, and just the fact that we're actually trying to do this in the current year was difficult enough. I think perhaps my last question for the group, we certainly look at financial as the easy metric when it comes to efficiencies, and that's while that from a budgetary perspective, that's the thing that we'd want to hang our hat on. But I guess are there other benchmarks or ways we should be thinking about efficiencies beyond the financial that would be useful in a framework of assessing the cost and benefit of an approach to efficiencies in a particular area? Yeah, Jen, go ahead.
I don't think I'm going to answer your question very well, but it just made me think of maybe a comment I'll make.
Sure.
I think one of the challenges we've had is that, so obviously we focus a lot on headcount and people, right? Because that's where a lot of the costs are from. And a lot of things fall back to some of the planning factors and some of those hard numbers and benchmarks that, you know, you can look at and say, well, let's make this 2 a 1.5, for example. And some of the challenges we've had as the BAC helping or to understanding these things have been the flexibility that each school has and how they implement those things means that everybody is doing things a little bit different, right? So we've seen cases where we've like reduced a planning factor, but in the end, it didn't actually have much of an impact on instruction because somebody wasn't using that headcount the way that it looked like they were using it. So I think the flexibility that the schools have to run their schools makes some of these things really hard for us to benchmark and put our arms around. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there as an observation, because I think a lot of times we come up on these things that get really complicated. It looks, oh, simple, let's just reduce this and get save some money, save some headcount, make it more efficient, but it isn't always that simple.
Yeah, especially when we know the principals have a little bit of leeway in terms of their staffing. Is that really what you're driving at, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get your arms around what you may know at your school. It could be very different somewhere else. And I can only imagine how people like Leslie and others have to try to figure out what every school is different. You have to make a lot of average assumptions, which I think does make it really hard to really dive into, you know, how can you get efficiencies on some of these things.
And Jennifer.
I kind of just more of a follow-up on a question, I guess, on that. I'm curious, for those who have been around more and watched longer or watching sort of some of the, maybe this is a comment, maybe for your question for Monique or Grady or Leslie, is, you know, that as the changes that are happening sort of in central office with the new principal of principals, things like that. Is this, I mean, the schools are always going to run as the schools are going to run. There's always going to be some differentiation, right? But do we think that we will start to see more, less of that variation that you're sort of getting at, Jen? That makes it hard to sort of see these things?
So I guess one of the things I would just say is that we've had a principal for quite a long time, as long as I've been a parent in APS. When I came in, it was Meg Tasillo, and then you know we've had so many people in that position. Cynthia Johnson was that position for quite a while as well. So one of the things I think that Cynthia Johnson brought about was this idea of, instead of becoming a system of schools, becoming a school system. And I believe that there is interest in looking for that alignment, so that I think more appropriately that everyone is kind of following some marching orders when it comes to instructional vision and things like that. You know, any of those other systematized things, so that when you go to one school, you're getting the same quality of education as another school. And I also would say that in some instances, I have seen that principals have had a little bit of opportunity to be able to say, well, listen, you know, my kids are having a lot more trouble in this area and we need to concentrate on this. And that's when they can work with the principal's principal, I believe, to try to figure out, you know, how to address some of those particular needs at their school. There is a question about whether or not, you know, principals are using the money as allocated, and that's an important question, and it's something that we should be looking at. I'm sure it's something that the school board will potentially, or maybe the system will continue to look at. I think that the real question here really is, for me, as one board member, is, you know, are the kids getting what they're supposed to be getting? And for me, that's the bigger question. So that's just what I would say. Maybe Leslie would have another way to answer that.
No, I think that you really hit the nail on the head there. You know, that whole system of school, you know, system of schools versus a school system is, as we've gotten bigger, that's really what we've had to look towards, because, you know, when you're a very small school system, you can have 12 different schools doing 12 different things, and it's not as hard to manage as it is when you get to 35 different schools or 40 different schools, and we've really seen that in the resource allocation too, that we need to be more mindful of having that focus on equity. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody gets the same thing. It means that people get what they need, and we need to focus more on that. And that's not something that we've been doing.
Thanks, Leslie. That's really what I was trying to make sure that I highlighted, is that equity is not giving everyone the same equal thing, because that may not be what a child needs to succeed. So while we're thinking about all of those elements, that's an aspect that sometimes gets lost in the phrase equity. Thanks for the opportunity, Chuck.
No, appreciate it. It's easy to throw the word efficiency around, and it, you know, I think, you know, generally we all have some framework of what that means to us, but you know, I think I think the last point about, you know, this philosophical difference between, you know, and only having lived here since 2015, you know, how Arlington, you know, there's sort of a legacy of, you know, how the system was, and with this explosion of growth in enrollment and the need for more infrastructure and to build out our school system to accommodate those needs, I think sometimes we get a little bit lost that, you know, previous decisions were made given the conditions at the time, and they were adequate decisions at that point in time. But then, you know, how do we revisit those, given that now, you know, the environment in which our school system sits in, you know, 2021 and beyond is a little bit different than it was, you know, say 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing. I think the point that I was making was one I think Bridget was making earlier with the MiFi example. So I think these are important questions that we think about as we try to become a school system instead of a system of schools. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else on that front? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who has, the policy front for us. I know that he's highlighted in the past couple of meetings. There's some things that we'll probably begin to want to take a look at as the BAC, as they affect the different financial systems and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Eric for that.
Okay, and let me share my desktop here to share. Let's see, where did I put that? Sorry, I'm struggling to share my desktop here. Okay, so as I mentioned last time, there were really three areas or three points in time where we can provide input to policies. The first group I'm going to talk about here are the ones that are open for public comment on a draft. So again, going back last week, about 6 months ahead of time before something's going to be reviewed, people can comment. Again, anyone can comment, and we as a board can comment as a group on the draft, on the policy as it's currently written. That information is collected, it's drafted, and then there's an open period to review and provide commentary on the draft. And then there's a third period in time where it's getting ready to be reviewed in an upcoming board meeting. That draft is getting ready, and a final period is available to provide final commentary before the board meeting. And I'll talk about each of those three here and what's coming up. In terms of the ones where their drafts have already been written and they're looking for public comment, you can see on my screen here that there's 4 coming up, and they're all scheduled for review in January. So again, The drafts are out there, looking for commentary on the drafts for the next few weeks. They'll take those back, and those will be then presented or discussed in the January board meeting or February board meeting. The four that are here, again, not necessarily financial related. Obviously, this one about the school board advisory committees overall is of interest to all school board advisory committees. Really, I would encourage everyone to take a look. It talks about, how the rules and the structure of our committees, some of the mechanics and around our committees and how they're operated, and then talks a little bit about the charter and how it's written here, how it's drafted here now. I've kind of highlighted or I'm displaying or showing the points, basically the charter points for the Budget Advisory Committee. So, I'll leave this here for a second, let everyone take 30 seconds to read it. If you have any comments or have any thoughts about what's here, send them to me, and we can then collect those and aggregate them and submit them. But I think what's here is probably pretty straightforward. I'll leave it here for 30 seconds, let everyone read it, and then we can move on.
Yeah, and while folks are doing that, one thing that we'll probably see come springtime is Christina Diaz-Torres is one of the two board members that does work the policy front on behalf of the rest of the school board, and there'll be an implementation plan that will accompany this policy. So there'll be a BAC specific one, and that will get more into the business rules about how we operate as a council. So, we'll spend some time in the spring, in addition to budget review. Christina will work with us on the BAC specific piece of this overall policy, and we'll see some, back and forth with that and our opportunity to help shape the implementation plan to this particular policy.
Okay. The next set is the third one I was mentioning, which is in the upcoming school board meeting. There's a number of policies that are scheduled to be reviewed. Again, there's 4 here: charter schools and a few others. Summer learning opportunities. None directly related to financial management processes or policies. But again, I'm calling them out just in case you have an interest and want to go provide input into them. The final group is the group that I mentioned last time, where again, there are policies that are scheduled to be reviewed at throughout the year. It's always an ongoing review, they're done on a rolling basis. And I mentioned last time, coming up in the schedule in May through July are a number of policies that are directly related to what we look at and comment on primarily. So all the financial management related policies. So you'll see some of them are currently scheduled for May, June, July. Now, normally what I'd say is, 6 months ahead of time, we need to be prepared we have the opportunity to provide input on, again, the existing language that they would take and use as part of the draft. And for some of these things, it definitely is going to make sense. I'm still waiting to hear back, though. You can see where they had dates for where they were looking for input by, and they're still from last year. And that's because all of these were scheduled to be reviewed actually about this time this year, and were deferred or delayed until later next year. They haven't been, these are kind of, I guess I would classify these as being tentatively scheduled for May through July, and they haven't yet actually established the dates for providing feedback, the due dates for the feedback on the existing policies. So I'm hesitant right now. I'm waiting for some more information about when they're going to set these for sure, and when they're going to provide dates so that we can use those dates to better manage our time. I'm hesitant to have everyone start going to look at all 8 of the financial management policies right now without knowing that they are actually going to be reviewed in May, June, or July. But those are coming up, and so hopefully in our next meeting next month, we'll have a schedule for looking at those.
Yeah, I'm looking at a couple down there about budget savings and budget development. Not development piece, maybe not, but the budget savings. I think we'd be keenly interested in, how that plays out.
Yeah, and they were all, if you would have looked at this time last year, all of these would have been teed up to be reviewed right now, which means that earlier, late last spring, we would have been providing input, or even into the summer providing input, and those are the dates that are still reflected here. So they haven't fully updated all the review schedule for all the policies.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
Okay. Any questions for Eric on the policy review schedule? I think definitely the advisory committee one, being top of mind, and obviously that affects us directly in our work we do as the BAC. So would invite everyone to review that, and if you have comment, pass to Eric, and then we'll consolidate. I don't know that we'll shop it around, to look for some consensus, but if there is some necessity to do that, then we'll chart a way ahead that is compliant with how we work through that.
Chuck, this is Juan. I also wanted to bring to your attention, and Eric can kind of follow up on it. The Transportation Committee also they're reviewing some of the policies, and they will reveal if any of those have any budget implications also.
Okay. Thank you, Juan. Any other comments, questions concerning policy review? Okay. Last thing on our agenda item, I wanted to talk about way ahead. So talk to you real briefly about, my thoughts on December, January, February, and how we roll these out in terms of, the BAC and what we're, again, getting smart as we need to on different areas of the budget, not knowing what the future's going to look like come end of February, what the state of the budget's going to look like if we're deficit, small deficit, big D deficit. I think certainly a few months ago, we were definitely looking at more in the big D deficit in the $40 to $50 million range. Hopefully, with what we've heard tonight about some of the closeout, maybe that will be mitigated to some degree, and we'll have an opportunity to be a little bit more thoughtful and a little more surgical in our advice, as opposed to something that's more blunt. What I'm looking at, and this will be some discussions with Leslie, to tee up these conversations. But in December, what I'd like to try to do is to have a discussion about our choice schools. Obviously, a keen area of interest in terms of the choice schools, looking at the cost and benefit versus our neighborhood schools. But what I'd like to have tied with that discussion is our new equity officer for the system, because I think the two really do go hand in hand. We have this immense commitment to providing a variety of experiences for the different students within APS, and that's a differentiator for us. But it also, it does cause some parents to have concerns that those choice schools do disadvantage some versus others. But I think tying that discussion in with equity would be one way to think about the choice schools in terms of the financial impact, but also the equity impact. And certainly it's a topic that a number of you raised in our survey, that felt that it would be time well spent just getting a little bit better understanding of our choice schools. But I think also meeting our new equity officer and trying to get their perspective on how, one, they're going to approach the job, but more importantly, from a budgetary perspective, how they're looking at evaluating the budget from an equity viewpoint, and how they see that. And then in January, taking a look at the enrollment projection. I think in years past we've had the demographic study. Obviously, with the pandemic, we've seen the enrollment projections that have come in a little bit differently in terms of, we know that there's been some families that have either moved away, or some families that have chosen to opt out of public schooling and take private schooling on, or maybe they've decided to homeschool. But the enrollment projection is certainly a lot of implications for our budget, and so getting an update on where things stand, both near term, midterm, and long term, with enrollment projections for the school system, and then tying that into teaching and learning, how that those affect our planning factors, compensation costs and things of that nature, based on the fact that the enrollment will set the table for a lot of that work. And then finally, looking at February with really tying in infrastructure, which will be always a good portion of our budget with the CIP, but also thinking about the FAC and the JFAC chairs attending our meeting and offering us their thoughts, particularly from a budgetary perspective, as infrastructure and CIP take shape within the budget, given that we've just done the 10-year CIP and the budget direction for that. So that's kind of the way ahead that I'm taking a look at for December, January, February. Open up the floor to any comments or questions or thoughts about those topics as we move ahead. Okay, let's see. Oh, Andy, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. I wanted to ask if we were going to, the demographic part of the discussion as far as option schools go, as far as like looking at maybe some of the inherent or I don't know, programmatic guidelines that the county has already established for them, as far as, who's accepted, or there's any type of funding stream, things like that for the option schools as we take a deeper dive into those programs.
Yeah, I can't say that I've certainly thought through all the details, but I think what I would ask is if you have specific areas in those discussions that you would like to address, please send those to me so I can tee up a meeting with Leslie, and she and I can try to sketch out. I think importantly, like what to present, but more importantly, like who we should invite that might shed some light on some of those questions that may fit around those areas where they can help us answer those in a thoughtful way to inform our thinking. Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think on the, I assume that of these topics that in the infrastructure one, if there was space to, I'd really be very interested in understanding how a permanent virtual program is fitting into the APS's plans, to meet sort of presumably projected enrollment increases at some point, and those constraints, and sort of understanding that and having a kind of a better understanding of where a permanent virtual piece fits in. And I believe that's part of current IPP sort of plans that were sort of maybe discussed in the spring or so. So I'd be interested in understanding that a little bit better.
Okay. Other thoughts or comments, questions on the topics in the way ahead? I think what I'll do is I'll send a note just out to the BAC members proper. I think really looking at maybe 3 or 4 discussion areas for those topics, and then Eric and I can sit down with Leslie and talk through those, and then I think really try to shape the presentations that would be in those meetings, and more importantly, the experts within the school system that can help best inform us on those topic areas, so that we have some time to allow people to thoughtfully prepare for some of these bigger questions that you guys are asking, that we examine prior to the delivery of the superintendent's budget. Okay. Before we move to adjourn, any final thoughts, comments, questions from the BAC or from other members who've joined us, or other folks who've joined us tonight? Okay. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Motion.
So moved.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay. All right. With that, again, I appreciate everyone's time and attention. I do hope everyone has an opportunity to power down a little bit tomorrow with the federal holiday, and more importantly, the you're just thinking about the way ahead. I appreciate the thoughtfulness in the comments tonight as we again try to wrestle with an ever-changing budget environment. I think no 2 years have ever looked alike since I've been on this, and I would say that I don't think that experience is unique. So again, I appreciate everyone's time and attention tonight, and look forward to seeing you all in December.
What's the date of the next meeting?
Good question. Let me confirm. Be the second Wednesday, so that would be the 8th of December.
Got it. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.